Rosa lived in a simple little house at the end of a narrow, quiet street. It was September 2022, and the heat was beginning to become suffocating, signaling the arrival of summer. A widow for nearly 10 years, she supported the home with her modest retirement pension and small sewing jobs. But her greatest challenge lay elsewhere, since the accident that took the life of her only son and daughter-in-law just over a year ago. Rosa had assumed full care of her granddaughter, Sofía. The girl, 7 years old, was intelligent and lively, and her open smile was the only consolation for the deep pain the grandmother still felt over the loss of the child's parents. That Tuesday morning, while Rosa was carefully combing Sofía's dark brown curly hair, getting her ready for another day at school, she heard firm knocks on the front door. Her heart immediately raced. Something told her it was not good news. When she opened the door, she was met by a bailiff, a short man with a stern expression and tired eyes, who handed her a thick, white envelope. Without offering many explanations, he only said in an almost procedural tone that Rosa should appear in court. There, clutching the letter with trembling hands, Rosa felt a tightness in her chest so strong that for a moment she thought she might faint. Sofía, oblivious to what was happening, watched her grandmother in silence, her big, attentive eyes already realizing that this day would not be like the others. Rosa slowly closed the door, trying to hide her unease from her granddaughter. The paper she had received trembled between her fingers as if it had a life of its own. She sat on the old dark green velvet sofa, its arms worn by time, taking deep breaths to compose herself. It was a judicial document informing her that Claudia and Ricardo, Sofía's paternal aunt and uncle, were filing a formal petition for the girl's custody. A chill ran down her spine at the thought of them. Claudia, always impeccably dressed, with her sharp green eyes that seemed to evaluate every person as if they were an object in a display case, and Ricardo, with that forced smile and words calculated to be anything but sincere. Rosa knew that duo well, despite their infrequent company, and she knew that they had never had any genuine interest in Sofía before the tragedy. She took a deep breath, put the notice in the pocket of her apron, and returned to the room, trying to maintain a serene expression as she helped her granddaughter put on her worn sneakers. She tried to make small talk as usual, asking about math homework or about the little friend who had recently joined the school, but she felt her throat tighten and her face burn with an emotion she struggled to hide. While watching the girl arrange her notebooks in her pink backpack adorned with faded stickers, Rosa thought about how life had already taken so much from her. First her husband, then her son, and now perhaps her granddaughter. When they finally reached the school gate, Rosa embraced Sofía with a special tenderness, as if each hug might be the last. Seeing her enter with a smile, unaware of the complex and uncertain world unfolding outside, Rosa knew she had no choice but to fight, no matter how much it would cost her. As soon as Sofía disappeared behind the school gate, Rosa turned slowly and walked to the bus stop. At that moment, every step seemed too heavy, as if her feet were tied to invisible stones. She boarded the crowded bus, gripping firmly onto the metal bar as she watched the scenery pass by through a foggy window. Normally, that journey was accompanied by friendly conversations with neighbors or the distant sound of the driver's radio. But today, everything seemed distant and empty, muffled by the disturbing news she had just received. Rosa reread the paper several times, trying to understand every word written there. The legal battle, which had once seemed only a distant possibility, was now becoming an inescapable reality, and her mind whirled between fear and outrage in the face of the imminent threat of losing what was dearest to her. That very day, she decided to seek help. It was almost noon when she entered a small law office in the historic center of the city. The place smelled of old paper mixed with the strong coffee someone was preparing in the back. There she met Ignacio, a lawyer so young that he hardly appeared experienced, but with eyes so confident and warm that they immediately inspired trust. His hair was tousled with spiky black strands that contrasted with his always impeccably aligned suit. Rosa recounted her story in a voice choked with emotion, feeling ashamed for not being able to hold back tears in front of that stranger. Ignacio listened attentively, making only a few notes as she spoke. When she finished, Rosa felt almost vulnerable, expecting judgment or even disbelief. Instead, Ignacio simply placed his hand on the table, leaned in slightly and said firmly, "Mrs. Rosa, I'm with you on this. We will fight together." At that moment, Rosa felt, perhaps for the first time that day, a genuine spark of hope. Leaving Ignacio's office, Rosa felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Although his words had strengthened her shaky heart, the path ahead seemed long and difficult. Walking through the narrow streets of the historic center, she noticed that the sky had already grown very dark, signaling that she had spent more time there than she had planned. She quickened her pace, worried about Sofía, who would be returning from school, accompanied by her neighbor, Mrs. Helena, an eccentric woman with long grey hair who always wore floral dresses far too colorful for her age, yet whose energy and optimism were contagious. When Rosa entered the small wooden house, she found the two chatting cheerfully about the neighbor's new kitten. Rosa smiled slightly, seeing them so oblivious to the storm that was about to come. That night, after preparing a simple soup and putting Sofía to sleep with stories and lullabies she had learned in her own childhood, Rosa was left alone in the small living room, illuminated only by the dim light of an old lamp. Sitting at the table with the notification paper in front of her, she felt an immense weight descend upon her weary shoulders. She remembered her son, Bruno, who had been a just and hard-working young man since childhood, and her daughter-in-law, Mariana, whose laugh was so warm and welcoming that it made even the hardest days seem lighter. The accident had taken from them much more than their physical presence. It had stolen dreams and plans that Rosa knew could never be replaced. At the same time that a stubborn tear escaped her eyes, Rosa felt a powerful certainty within that she would do anything to protect Sofía. She was ready to face the entire world if necessary to ensure that her granddaughter would never feel abandoned again. In the following weeks, Rosa's life turned into an exhausting routine of court visits, frequent meetings with Ignacio, and sleepless nights filled with endless worries. Each trip to the courthouse seemed to consume a part of her already scarce energy. The cold walls, the corridors lit by flickering fluorescent lights, and the slow bureaucracy made her feel small and powerless before a system that understood nothing of love, only of papers and numbers. Even so, Rosa never allowed Sofía to perceive her anguish. She stayed strong, smiling, playing, and cooking the girls' favorite dishes, like the orange cake with zest that Mariana, her late daughter-in-law, used to make on the girls' birthdays. Rosa knew she needed to preserve Sofía's joy and innocence for as long as possible. During one of the first hearings, Rosa encountered Claudia and Ricardo after a long time. They arrived together with a deliberately elegant posture, dressed in sober and expensive clothes, as if they were attending a social event rather than contesting for the custody of a child. Claudia, impeccable as always, wore an overly flashy pearl necklace and a navy blue tailored suit, its rigid lines seemingly reflecting perfectly her cold and distant character. Ricardo remained silent most of the time, but his constantly restless gaze suggested he was always calculating his next move. Upon seeing Rosa, both forced artificial smiles and greeted her with a politeness so polished it seemed almost offensive. "Dear Rosa, we are doing this for Sofía's own good," said Claudia, in a voice too sweet to be true. Rosa only nodded silently, feeling a silent revolt growing inside as she noticed the falsehood masked behind those impeccable smiles. The judge opened the session in a monotone, almost indifferent voice. Rosa, sitting next to Ignacio, felt her heart tighten every time she heard her name mentioned amid legal words she could barely understand. When Ignacio finally took the floor to defend her, Rosa watched attentively, admiring the way he spoke with clarity and assurance. He was indeed very young, but there was something in him, a genuine energy that strongly contrasted with the rigid and theatrical posture of the lawyer hired by Claudia and Ricardo. Ignacio presented simple, everyday details of Rosa and Sofia's life, such as her care in helping her granddaughter with school assignments, the afternoons spent together in the city park playing, and the small traditions they had created to ease the pain of the parents' absence. As Ignacio spoke, Rosa noticed the judge's eyes soften, perhaps touched by the simplicity and truth in the young lawyer's words. However, the sense of victory was short-lived. Soon, it was the turn of the uncle's lawyer, a middle-aged man named Alvaro, whose lined face and hard expression gave the impression of someone used to winning at any cost. In a deep, well-trained voice, he began to describe a life full of privileges that Claudia and Ricardo could offer Sofía: expensive schools, extracurricular courses, international travel, and every imaginable material comfort. As the lawyer spoke, Rosa perceived curious glances being thrown her way, as if silently questioning whether she was truly the best person to raise the girl. No matter how much she tried to maintain a firm posture, Rosa felt diminished and vulnerable in the face of the apparent wealth that was paraded before her like an almost insurmountable challenge. At that moment, the feeling of powerlessness seemed to suffocate her once again, and Rosa could only think about how to explain to an innocent child that love might not be enough to ensure they stayed together. After that first hearing, Rosa returned home completely exhausted. Upon entering the living room, she felt loneliness weighing on her like a physical presence, making her even more anguished. The little house now seemed different, quieter and emptier, as if the fear of loss had seeped into the peeling walls and old furniture. While trying to organize her thoughts, she remembered Sofía still at school. Time had passed quickly, and amid the tension of the hearing, she had forgotten to tell Mrs. Helena to pick up the girl. She rushed to the window and saw that the neighbor, always punctual, was already waiting at the gate with Sofía by her side, firmly holding the child's hand with a worried look. When she opened the door and met the curious eyes of her granddaughter, Rosa tried to smile naturally, but immediately realized that she had not convinced the girl. Sofía was not naive. She could easily read the tired and sad look in her grandmother's eyes. During dinner, as they ate their usual rice and beans, Sofía broke the silence by asking softly, "Grandma, am I going to have to live with Aunt Claudia?" The innocent question made Rosa's heart tighten once again, even more than before. She took a deep breath, placed her spoon on the plate, and looking directly into the granddaughter's large, deep eyes, answered in a soft and steady voice, "I'm not going to let anyone take you away, my love. We will be together forever." As she spoke those words, she felt a pang of fear because she knew that ensuring this did not depend solely on her. It required her to believe that the love they shared would be stronger than any argument or money the uncles could present in court. That night, while putting Sofía to sleep, Rosa stayed by her side longer than usual, gently stroking her hair and listening to her quiet breathing until the girl fell into a deep slumber, silently vowing that she would do the impossible to keep the promise she had just made. In the following days, Rosa plunged into a frantic and anguished routine. Ignacio began visiting her frequently, spending hours reviewing documents and devising strategies for the next hearing. With every new meeting, Rosa realized that the young lawyer was deeply committed, perhaps even more than she had expected. Amid the paperwork scattered on the kitchen table, Ignacio carefully explained each step they needed to follow. Despite the difficulty in understanding legal jargon, Rosa strove to catch every detail. She knew her fight would be arduous and that she needed to understand exactly what her rights were and what risks she was facing. Ignacio spoke with an almost infinite patience, gesturing with agile hands as if trying to make visible what Rosa had trouble imagining. In his presence, Rosa felt less alone, as if someone was at her side, willing to protect Sofía with the same dedication she herself showed. On one of those visits, while they were discussing evidence to reveal the true nature of the uncles, Rosa suddenly recalled an apparently insignificant detail that could change everything. Shortly after Bruno and Mariana's death, Claudia had visited her home, offering to take Sofía for a few days. Rosa remembered perfectly the woman's cold look that day and how her words seemed carefully rehearsed. Even stranger was the fact that Claudia had arrived accompanied by an unknown man who barely entered the house and stayed in the background, leaning against the old wall of the backyard. Upon hearing this account, Ignacio furrowed his brow, clearly intrigued. He asked Rosa to describe the man again. Rosa closed her eyes and, searching her memory, recalled him clearly. He was tall, with an angular face and a reddish beard, dressed in dark clothes as if he were trying not to attract attention, yet his vigilant expression was hard to forget. When she finished describing him, Ignacio quickly stood up, took note of the details with renewed energy, and stated with determination, "I think we've found our first important clue." In the following days, Ignacio dedicated himself intensely to the task of finding that mysterious man. Rosa continued with her routine, trying not to let the growing tension in her chest show as each hour passed without concrete news. In the mornings, while walking with Sofía to school, she couldn't help but glance discreetly behind her, wondering if she might be being followed or watched. She felt exposed and vulnerable, and every unfamiliar face seemed potentially dangerous. When she returned home alone, doubts piled up. Who was that man? Why would Claudia have come accompanied by someone so suspicious? And what exactly were they plotting against her and Sofía? The silence of that once peaceful street now seemed to hide menacing secrets that Rosa could not completely decipher. Finally, on a hot October afternoon, Ignacio appeared at Rosa's door, his expression clearly signaling that something important had happened. He asked to come in quickly, closing the door behind him as if to shield himself from something invisible. Sitting in front of Rosa, he opened a dark folder and placed a blurred photograph on the table, clear enough for Rosa to immediately recognize the face. It was the man who had accompanied Claudia months earlier. Ignacio explained in a low, serious tone that the individual's name was Leandro Marquez, a former police officer expelled from the force for involvement in illegal espionage and blackmail schemes. The information was frightening, and Ignacio further revealed that Leandro had recently been seen several times in the company of Ricardo in isolated, discreet locations. As Ignacio detailed the situation, Rosa felt a shiver run down her spine. That discovery confirmed her worst suspicions. Claudia and Ricardo would stop at nothing, even illegal means, to achieve their objective. Rosa understood at that moment that the fight for Sofía's custody was no longer just a matter of legal or financial issues. It had become a direct battle against dangerous and much darker forces than she had imagined. Armed with this new information, Ignacio decided to intensify his investigation even further. He advised Rosa to take extra care, especially when leaving with Sofía, avoiding isolated paths and always keeping in touch with him or with Mrs. Helena. Rosa followed his instructions to the letter, even though it meant a drastic change in her already exhausted routine. Every trip to the supermarket or her granddaughter's school was carefully planned. She always chose busy times when the presence of other people nearby could offer greater security. Even with these precautions, Rosa constantly felt a growing anxiety that robbed her of sleep and peace. She began to observe every detail around her, noticing even small changes in parked cars or unfamiliar people roaming her street. Unknowingly, she had entered a state of perpetual alertness that wore down both her body and mind. One morning, while returning from school, after ensuring Sofía was safely in class, Rosa noticed a black car with darkened windows parked across the street, near the small market where she usually shopped. Something about that sight deeply disturbed her. She tried to hide her concern by feigning interest in a fruit stand, all the while stealing quick glances in the direction of the vehicle. Her heart raced even faster when she realized the car was not empty. Someone was watching her from inside, hidden by the dark tint on the windows. Feeling fear take over, Rosa quickly walked home, nearly stumbling over the uneven, pothole-ridden sidewalk. Once inside, she immediately locked the door and, breathing with difficulty, noticed her hands trembling. At that moment, she fully understood how far Claudia and Ricardo were willing to go to win this battle. The next day, Rosa received an urgent call from Ignacio, asking her to come to his office immediately. When she arrived, she found him visibly shaken, something she had never seen in him before. With agitated gestures and a tense voice, Ignacio explained that during the previous night he had received anonymous messages containing veiled threats against him, and especially against Rosa and Sofía. The words left no room for doubt. Someone wanted to silence them before the truth came out. Ignacio said he had already reported the threats to the authorities, but stressed that they needed to be extra cautious immediately. Hearing this, Rosa felt a knot tighten in her throat. As much as she wanted to face the situation with courage, the fear for her granddaughter's safety nearly paralyzed her. However, when Ignacio suggested that maybe it would be better to leave for a few days, Rosa was categorical. "I can't simply run away now. We have to face this, Ignacio. If we give in to fear, they win." After the meeting, Rosa returned home determined to keep her granddaughter's life as normal as possible. Yet that decision did nothing to dispel the deep feeling of vulnerability that took over her. Every noise on the street, every unexpected knock on the door seemed to bring an inevitable shock. In the afternoon, while she was distracted washing dishes, she heard the gate slam forcefully. She ran to the window in alarm and saw Mrs. Helena arriving hurriedly with Sofía, apparently nervous and agitated. When Rosa opened the door, she immediately noticed that her neighbor had tears in her eyes. In a trembling voice, Mrs. Helena recounted that when she had left the school with Sofía, they were accosted by a strange man who tried to grab the girl by the arm. Luckily, some nearby people noticed and quickly intervened, frightening the stranger, who then fled. Embracing Sofía tightly, Rosa felt a deep anger surge within her. That had crossed a line she never could have imagined. It was now clear that Claudia and Ricardo had no scruples, and if she wanted to ensure her granddaughter's safety, she needed to act quickly before it was too late. That night, Sofía had difficulty sleeping, something unusual for her. Rosa sat on the edge of her granddaughter's bed, gently caressing her hair as she tried to soothe her. In a soft voice, the girl asked why someone would try to take her away. Rosa's heart broke hearing that question, laden with innocence and fear. Not knowing how to explain something so complicated and painful to such a small child, Rosa simply replied with sincerity, "Not all people have good intentions, my dear, but I promise that as long as I'm here, no one will be able to hurt you." Sofía nodded slowly, but the look of worry did not leave her big dark eyes. When she finally fell asleep, Rosa remained sitting for a long time, watching every gentle movement of the girl, knowing that now she had to protect her not only from legal battles, but also from real, immediate dangers she had never imagined facing. Early the next morning, Rosa and Ignacio went to the police station to officially report the incident. The environment was cold and impersonal, filled with busy officers typing endless reports on old computers. While waiting to be attended, Rosa felt a mix of anxiety and outrage at having to prove, once again, that she was a grandmother capable of caring for and protecting her granddaughter. The officer who attended them, a gray-haired man with an impassive expression, listened carefully, slowly jotting down every detail. After the statement, he said curtly that he would launch an investigation, but warned that it would be difficult to do anything without concrete evidence or images of the incident. Rosa felt frustrated again, realizing that the system always seemed to demand something more to protect her. As they left the station, Ignacio promised Rosa that they would find a way to obtain that evidence, no matter what it took. In his eyes, she saw an even stronger determination, which reinforced her own will to fight until the end. While the authorities slowly investigated the case, Ignacio decided to look for witnesses on his own. He knew that time was of the essence and that he couldn't rely solely on police bureaucracy. He started with the neighborhood near the school, speaking with shopkeepers, residents, and even street cleaners, hoping someone had seen the incident or noticed anything unusual. After days of fruitless searches, Ignacio finally managed to speak with Maria Julia, a lady who sold snacks near the location where the attempted kidnapping occurred. With keen eyes and a surprisingly detailed memory, Maria Julia confirmed that she had seen a tall man with a reddish beard lingering around the area several times before the incident. She also described a black car, exactly like the vehicle Rosa had noticed near her house days earlier. Ignacio's heart raced as he realized that this might be the missing piece to directly link the uncles to the attack on Sofía. That very night, Ignacio went immediately to Rosa's house to share the discovery. Seated in the kitchen under the weak yellowish light of an old lamp, they discussed their next steps intensely. Ignacio suggested installing a discreet camera near the house and school to try to capture any compromising images in case of another suspicious approach. Although apprehensive about the idea of living under constant surveillance, Rosa understood the necessity of the plan. She knew that she had to protect her granddaughter and gather solid evidence to expose Claudia and Ricardo before the court. While Ignacio explained how the system worked, Rosa realized that her relationship with the young lawyer was becoming something deeper than just professional. He was no longer just a hired defender, but someone who genuinely cared about her future and that of Sofía. At the end of the conversation before leaving, Ignacio grasped Rosa's wrinkled hands, firmly looked her directly in the eyes and said in a calm but determined voice, "We are going to win this, Rosa. I promise you." At that moment, Rosa felt stronger and more determined than ever. During the following week, Rosa had to adapt to the strange routine of living with cameras installed around her house. The initial sensation was uncomfortable, as if her privacy had been stolen, but she quickly got used to the idea, knowing that it could make all the difference for Sofía's safety. Ignacio monitored the recordings daily, keeping in constant contact with Rosa to inform her of any suspicious activity nearby. As the days passed, Rosa noticed something curious. The cameras, besides recording possible threats, also captured small, everyday and happy moments that she would have never seen otherwise. In one of those recordings, she was moved watching Sofía play joyfully in the backyard, trying to teach Mrs. Helena some dance steps, who awkwardly followed the girl with her swirling, colorful dresses. Those little moments gave Rosa the strength to face the situation and remember that it was worth fighting for that simple happiness. However, on the 10th day after the cameras were installed, Ignacio called Rosa in a worried tone, asking her to come to his office quickly. When she arrived, he showed her a recording from the previous early morning, revealing a disturbing image. Again, the black car parked near the house, and after a few minutes, the red-haired man, whom Rosa immediately recognized as Leandro, slowly walking to the residence's gate. He was watching the facade of the house carefully, taking notes and photographing the location. The video left Rosa deeply shaken, once again feeling invaded and vulnerable. Ignacio explained that they now had concrete evidence, something that could be taken directly to the police and the court, clearly demonstrating that there was a real and constant threat against her and Sofía. Although frightened, Rosa felt a strange relief at finally having something tangible in hand. With a deep sigh, she firmly grasped Ignacio's hand and said decisively, "Let's use this, Ignacio. It's time they knew we weren't playing around." The next morning, Rosa and Ignacio took the recordings straight to the police station. This time, the officer, faced with clear visual evidence, could no longer maintain his initial indifference. He watched the video several times, carefully noting every detail. Then, he promised that a team would immediately search for Leandro, since they now had indisputable proof that he was involved in a suspicious action against Rosa and her granddaughter. Ignacio emphasized the urgency, insisting that any delay could put them at risk. Rosa, sitting in an uncomfortable chair in the cramped room of the officer, felt her heart beating rapidly with a mix of anxiety and expectation. For the first time, it seemed they were gaining ground against Claudia and Ricardo. As they left the station, Rosa noticed a different sparkle in the young lawyer's eyes, a renewed confidence that carried the promise that justice was near. That afternoon, however, Rosa received a phone call that would once again change the course of the situation. On the other end was Miriam, a woman with a trembling voice who identified herself as Sofia's former nanny at Claudia and Ricardo's house during a short period after the death of the girl's parents. Miriam quickly explained that she had been following the case from a distance and, after watching a local news report about the incident, had decided to break her silence. She stated categorically that Sofía would never be well cared for by the uncles, revealing disturbing details about emotional neglect and manipulations she had witnessed while working for the couple. Miriam confessed that she had not spoken up before out of fear, since Claudia had threatened to ruin her if she revealed anything. However, now that she realized the gravity of the situation, she felt compelled to help. Hearing those words, Rosa felt a chill run through her entire body. She knew that this represented an even greater risk, but also understood that Miriam might be the key witness capable of revealing the true nature of Sofía's uncles before the court. Ignacio quickly arranged a meeting with Miriam at a discreet cafe downtown. Rosa decided to accompany him, anxious to hear firsthand what the woman had to say. Upon arriving, they found Miriam sitting at a corner table, nervous and constantly looking around as if she were being followed. She was young, with dark, expressive eyes that clearly revealed her fear. She dressed simply, almost as if trying to go unnoticed by the world. Miriam quickly greeted them in a nearly whispered voice and soon began to recount everything she knew. She described how Claudia often showed impatience with Sofía, ignoring simple requests for affection or attention, and that Ricardo, though silent, never intervened. She also recounted overhearing conversations where the uncles referred to the girl as a passport to obtain something they greatly desired, though she never discovered exactly what it was. Rosa listened intently, feeling her blood turn cold with each revelation, aware that the situation was even darker than she had imagined. The conversation was abruptly interrupted when Miriam's cell phone rang. She answered quickly, nearly immediately paling as she listened to the voice on the other end. She hung up with trembling hands, revealing to Rosa and Ignacio, in a tone of panic, that someone had found out about their meeting and was threatening her directly. Miriam stated that she needed to leave immediately, but Ignacio insisted that she remain calm and assured her that he would protect her. After a few minutes of persuasion, Miriam agreed to go directly with them to the police station to register the threats. On the way there, Rosa felt deeply uneasy, watching the streets and people around with a constant sense of impending danger. The presence of that young witness represented hope, but also increased the tension, making it clear that they were getting closer to exposing truths that Claudia and Ricardo would do anything to hide. In that moment, Rosa realized that the battle for Sofía's safety was only beginning to reveal its true proportions. When they arrived at the station, Miriam was so nervous that her hands visibly trembled. Ignacio carefully assisted her throughout the process, ensuring that every detail of her statement was recorded. The officer, now much more interested in the case given the accumulated evidence, decided to provide police protection for Miriam, recognizing the seriousness of the threats. Rosa felt a slight relief seeing that finally someone in the system was taking the real risks seriously. However, she knew that this was only the beginning of an even bigger fight. During Miriam's testimony, other worrisome details emerged, including reports that Claudia used to hold strange meetings at her home with influential people, often mentioning facilitated adoptions and necessary appearances. The young woman's words were clear and objective, with no sign of exaggeration or fabrication. Hearing this, Rosa felt the weight of responsibility to protect Sofía increase once again. It was no longer just about the girl's custody. It was about something deeper and darker that needed to be uncovered quickly. As they left the station and walked toward the parking lot, Rosa and Ignacio immediately noticed that something was wrong. The same black car with darkened windows was parked in a nearby spot, its engine running. Before they could react, the vehicle accelerated toward them, passing so close that it almost knocked them to the ground. Miriam screamed in alarm, tightly clutching Rosa's arm, while Ignacio quickly pulled both of them onto the sidewalk. In just a few seconds, the car vanished down the busy avenue, leaving them breathless and terrified. Rosa, her heart nearly leaping out of her chest, realized at that moment that this was no longer just about subtle intimidations or veiled threats. Someone was willing to hurt them directly to stop the investigation. Miriam, completely shaken, wept silently beside Rosa, repeatedly saying that she should never have gotten involved. Rosa embraced her tightly, whispering that this only showed how much courage was needed to protect an innocent child from something so perverse. In that moment, it became clear to Rosa that there was no turning back. This fight had to be seen through to the end. That same night, back at home, Rosa put Sofía to bed earlier than usual and sat in the kitchen with Ignacio to discuss their next steps. The atmosphere in the small kitchen was tense, heavy with a silence that neither seemed willing to break first. Finally, Ignacio, with furrowed brows and a worried expression, suggested that it might be safer to temporarily remove Sofía from school or even take her to a distant place for a few days until things calmed down. Rosa took a deep breath, slowly shaking her head in refusal. She knew how much Ignacio was trying to protect them, but deep inside, she felt that running away would be exactly what Claudia and Ricardo wanted. She calmly argued that any abrupt change could harm Sofía's emotional stability and that she preferred to intensify security rather than flee. After a thoughtful pause, Ignacio agreed with her decision, promising to personally arrange for discreet surveillance of the house and the area around the school. Rosa thanked him, realizing that even though both were exhausted, it was that mutual unity and trust that gave them strength to face what lay ahead. In the following days, the presence of discreet police officers near the school and the house brought a relative sense of security. Sofía soon noticed the change, asking why there were always different men nearby, watching from a distance. Rosa, trying not to alarm her, replied lightly that they were friends Ignacio had sent just to ensure everything was all right. The girl, though suspicious, accepted the explanation without pressing further. However, Rosa knew that this period of apparent tranquility could not last forever. Something inside her told her that Claudia and Ricardo were just waiting for the next opportunity to act. Every time Rosa left the house, she felt a tightening in her chest, as if waiting for the next blow, for the next threat. Amid all this anxiety, she received constant visits from Ignacio, who, besides offering legal support, was always concerned about her emotional well-being. Unbeknownst to her, Rosa was beginning to feel something for that young lawyer that went beyond gratitude. It was a feeling of deep trust and camaraderie, something she hadn't felt for anyone in a long time. The following afternoon, while Rosa was doing laundry in the backyard, her phone rang. The number was unknown. Her heart immediately raced, an odd sensation taking over her chest. She answered hesitantly, and on the other end, a calm yet threatening male voice spoke slowly. "If you really love your granddaughter, stop this nonsense. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we can if necessary." The ensuing silence was deafening. Rosa felt her legs weaken and had to cling to the edge of the sink to avoid falling. The call lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to mark her soul with a fear she had never felt before. For the first time since this battle began, she felt truly powerless, as if she were trapped in a dirty game where the rules were dictated by unscrupulous people. Without wasting time, Rosa called Ignacio, who answered on the first ring. As soon as she explained the threat, he fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "That means we're very close to the truth." The phrase, spoken with conviction, was meant to comfort her, but in that moment Rosa could only think about Sofia's safety. Ignacio insisted that Rosa leave the house and go to a safe location for at least a few days, but Rosa refused. "If I run away, I lose all my credibility in court. I can't hide now," she stated firmly, despite her evident fear. Ignacio sighed on the other end, and after a few seconds of hesitation, said something that made Rosa hold her breath. "If they're willing to threaten you directly, it means they no longer have control over the situation. This might be their mistake, and we can use that against them in a court." Rosa wasn't sure if that was an optimistic outlook or an even darker warning. Either way, there was no turning back. That night, Rosa had trouble sleeping. Every shadow cast on the wall seemed menacing. Every small noise from outside made her heart race. Sofía slept peacefully beside her, oblivious to the weight that had fallen on her grandmother's shoulders. As Rosa watched the girl's gentle breathing, she felt a mix of love and despair. She needed to protect her at all costs, but she knew she was dealing with dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to cross any boundary to get what they wanted. Her body was exhausted, but her mind would not allow her any rest. What would happen if justice wasn't on her side? And what if all of this wasn't enough to stop them from taking her granddaughter away? These questions haunted her until exhaustion finally overtook her and her eyes closed. The next morning, when Rosa opened the door to get the newspaper that a neighbor always delivered, she froze. There was a black envelope on the ground, placed right at the entrance of the house. The paper was thick without any identification. With trembling hands, she picked up the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside, she found a single photograph. Sofía at the school exit, holding her pink lunchbox, walking hand in hand with Mrs. Helena. The image was sharp, taken up close, and on the back was only a handwritten sentence: "She can vanish in the blink of an eye." Rosa felt her legs give out, and she had to cling to the door handle to avoid falling. Her entire body trembled. This time, it wasn't just a veiled threat, it was a direct warning. They were watching her granddaughter's every move. The brutal reality struck Rosa like a decisive blow. She and Sofía were being closely watched, and time to act was running out. Rosa wasted no time. With her heart still racing and her sweaty hands clutching the photo, she ran inside and locked all the doors and windows. She grabbed the phone and immediately called Ignacio, her voice trembling as she explained what she had just found. "This isn't just a threat anymore, Ignacio. They're too close," she said, almost out of breath. On the other end, the lawyer tried to calm her, but Rosa could hear the worry in his tone. "I'm coming over right now. Don't leave the house and don't answer anyone but me," he replied with a firmness Rosa had never heard before. Every second until his arrival seemed like an eternity. She held the photo as if it were proof of a crime that had yet to happen, trying to stay calm for Sofía, who innocently played in the living room, unaware of the terror unfolding around them. When Ignacio arrived, he examined the photo and the note with a serious expression. "This is psychological warfare. They want you to feel cornered, vulnerable. They want you to give in even before the final decision in court," he said, looking directly into Rosa's eyes. She swallowed hard. "And what if it isn't just a game? Ignacio, what if they really try something?" The lawyer sighed heavily, sitting in the chair beside her. "I won't let that happen, but we need to use this to our advantage." Then he took the envelope, photographed its contents with his cell phone, and said he would take everything to the police immediately. If before they thought they could act without leaving traces, now we have something concrete to directly connect these threats to Sofía's uncles, he concluded. Despite the fear still, Burning within her, Rosa felt a small glimmer of hope. Perhaps finally the tables would begin to turn in her favor. On the way to the station, Ignacio drove with heightened caution, constantly checking his rearview mirror to ensure they weren't being followed. Rosa, seated next to him, kept the photo of her granddaughter safely tucked in her purse, as if fearing that any lapse might make her vanish. The car sped through the busy streets, yet to Rosa, everything seemed distant, as if she were viewing the city through a foggy pane. Her only thought was Sofía. What would happen if they couldn't stop Claudia and Ricardo? With each new threat, the sense of danger became more real, more immediate. "We're going to get justice, Rosa," said Ignacio, noticing her unease. "They made a big mistake by threatening you so brazenly. Now we have something solid against them." Rosa slowly nodded, wanting to believe his words, but the fear still prevented her from feeling completely safe. When they arrived at the station, they were received by the same officer who had attended them before. This time, his demeanor was different. The black envelope, the photo, and the message completely changed the tone of the conversation. He examined the material carefully, while Ignacio emphasized the gravity of the situation. "With this, we can request immediate protective measures," said the officer, picking up the phone to issue direct orders to his team. "We'll reinforce the surveillance and open a formal investigation against Claudia and Ricardo." Rosa felt a small relief hearing that, but the tension still clung to her. "Does this mean they're going to be arrested?" she asked, her voice laden with anxiety. The officer sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Not yet, but we're closing the net. If there is any further suspicious activity, we'll have enough justification to detain them preventively." Rosa clenched her fists on the table. It wasn't the end yet, but it was an important step. Perhaps, for the first time, Claudia and Ricardo were starting to feel the real weight of their actions. That evening, Rosa tried to continue her routine with Sofía, but something inside her had changed. She no longer felt as safe in her own home. Every unusual sound, every flashing headlight on the street seemed like a warning that danger was still lurking. Seated at the edge of her bed, watching her granddaughter sleep, Rosa wondered how much longer she would have to live in this constant tension. Sofía was just a child and had already lost so much. She deserved to grow up in peace, without the fear of being torn away from someone who truly loved her. With a deep sigh, Rosa felt her heart grow stronger. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. Claudia and Ricardo were fighting with money and influence, but she would fight with something much more powerful, the unconditional love she felt for Sofía. The next day, Ignacio arrived early with some news. He had spent the entire night reviewing documents and had found a legal loophole that could accelerate the case. "Claudia and Ricardo bribed someone inside the court," he said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "I managed to trace a suspicious bank transfer linked to the judge who initially granted the hearing for the uncles." Rosa's eyes widened. "Does that mean we can prove that the process was manipulated?" Ignacio nodded. "Exactly. If we can obtain an order to investigate that judge's finances, we can expose all the corruption behind this case." For the first time, Rosa felt that fate was beginning to change in her favor. The truth was emerging, along with the hope that this fight might be nearing its end. But before that, she knew Claudia and Ricardo would do everything to prevent themselves from being exposed, and that meant the danger was far from over. Ignacio wasted no time. With the documents he had gathered, he filed a formal request for the investigation of the judge responsible for the case. The reaction was immediate. The next day, the court announced it would review every decision made up to that moment, placing Claudia and Ricardo under scrutiny. For Rosa, it was a gigantic step forward, but also a sign that the conflict was reaching a new level. Cornered, Claudia and Ricardo would not delay in counterattacking. Ignacio knew this and insisted that Rosa and Sofía remain under constant protection. The police reinforced the surveillance, ensuring both were safe, at least for now. Even so, Rosa couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, and she was right. 2 days later, while preparing breakfast, Rosa heard a loud crash coming from the front gate. She ran to the window and saw a hooded man trying to force his way in. Her heart raced. Before she could react, one of the on-duty officers shouted and drew his weapon, causing the intruder to retreat quickly and flee to a car waiting on the other side of the street. The vehicle sped away at high speed, disappearing around the next curve. Trembling, Rosa felt her legs weaken and had to lean against the wall to avoid collapsing. Ignacio arrived minutes later, finding her still in shock. "That was an act of intimidation," he said, furious. "They know they're losing and want to scare you into giving up." But something inside Rosa, instead of breaking her, grew even firmer. She would not give up. Not now. Not when she was so close to ensuring Sofia's safety forever. That same afternoon, Ignacio took the security camera footage to the station. The recordings clearly showed the moment of the attempted break-in, the getaway car, and, even with the hood partially covering the aggressor's face, a crucial detail: a tattoo on his left arm, partially visible as he tried to jump over the gate. The officer scrutinized the footage, and in a few minutes, his expression changed. "I know this guy," he murmured, almost to himself. "This man has appeared in previous investigations linked to dirty work. For influential people." Rosa and Ignacio exchanged apprehensive looks. This confirmed their suspicions that Claudia and Ricardo were operating outside the law, using criminals to intimidate them. The officer assured them that surveillance would be increased even further and that an active search for the suspect would be ordered. But the only thing that would truly calm Rosa was knowing that Claudia and Ricardo would finally pay for everything they had done. While returning home, Ignacio tried to reassure her. "The fact that they're so desperate means we're close to the end," he said firmly. "They know they could lose, and that's why they're resorting to extreme measures." Rosa listened, but her heart still pounded. In her innocent way, Sofía had not fully grasped what was happening, but Rosa knew the girl sensed something was wrong. That night, as she put her granddaughter to sleep, Sofía clutched her hand and asked softly, "You'll be here when I wake up, right, Grandma?" This question made Rosa choke back tears, swallowing the emotion with a gentle smile. "Always, my little one, always." And at that moment, more than ever, Rosa promised herself that this fight would end with Sofía safely in the arms of someone who truly loved her. The next day, after gathering the evidence, Ignacio scheduled a meeting with the officer in charge of the case. "This time, they won't get away," he told Rosa before leaving. And for the first time in a long while, Rosa wanted to believe it was true. At the police station, Ignacio presented the evidence Claudia had gathered to the officer, who scrutinized every document, calling in 2 investigators to review each item. The suspicious financial transactions were obvious, and the messages made it clear that Ricardo had not only bribed the system, but had also attempted to manipulate the outcome of the legal battle through veiled threats. "With this, we have enough to request his preventive arrest," said the officer, rising from his chair with a determined look. Ignacio nodded, though he knew they couldn't rush. "We need to ensure he doesn't have time to cover his tracks or escape," he warned. The officer agreed and promised to act quickly. Rosa, who until then had listened in silence, felt her entire body tremble. This was it. After so many sleepless nights, countless threats, and so much fear, they were finally nearing the end of this war. That afternoon, the news spread. An arrest warrant was issued for Ricardo, and the police activity surrounding the case began drawing attention. For her part, Claudia disappeared. Her phone was off, and no one knew her whereabouts. Rosa feared that she might have warned Ricardo and fled to save her own skin. Ignacio tried to calm her, saying that the net was closing, and that even if they tried to run, the evidence was irrefutable. However, when night fell, another blow struck Rosa hard. Sofía, who had been playing in the backyard while Mrs. Helena helped Rosa fold clothes in the living room, was suddenly nowhere to be found. The front gate was ajar, and her pink lunchbox lay on the sidewalk. Panic instantly overtook Rosa. Her worst fear had just become reality. Sofía had disappeared. Rosa ran into the street, her heart pounding, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place where Sofía might be, but there was no sign of the girl. "Sofía!" she shouted, her voice choked with despair. Mrs. Helena followed immediately, trying to keep calm, though her face betrayed panic. "She was here a minute ago, Rosa. I swear," she said, trembling. Ignacio arrived a few minutes later, alerted by Rosa's frantic call. When he saw the fallen lunchbox, his expression hardened. "They took her," he said, his voice laden with anger. Rosa felt her legs give out. The world spun around her, and for a moment, everything fell silent, except for the sound of her own pounding heart. "No, it can't be," she murmured, trying to catch her breath. But the reality was clear and cruel. Someone had taken Sofía, and there was no more time for hesitation. Immediately, Ignacio called the officer, mobilizing all available police forces. The security camera footage was quickly retrieved, revealing what Rosa had feared. A black car had been seen entering a property minutes earlier. The car belonged to a country house registered under the name of a shell company linked to Ricardo. Without hesitation, the police organized a team and set out immediately. Rosa insisted on going along, and despite initial resistance, Ignacio assured her he would accompany them. As the police car raced down the road at high speed, Rosa felt her chest burn with anxiety and fear. Her whole body was on high alert, and only one thought hammered in her mind: to find Sofía. Nothing else mattered. The road leading to the property was narrow and poorly lit, surrounded by tall trees casting eerie shadows under the weak light of the headlights. The silence inside the car was dense, broken only by the sound of engines accelerating toward the unknown. Rosa gripped her hands in her lap, her knuckles turning white from the force of holding her own anxiety. Ignacio, sitting next to her, kept his gaze fixed on the road, his jaw set in tension. When they finally arrived at the property's entrance, the officers quickly got out, weapons drawn, ready for any reaction. The officer made a discreet gesture for Rosa and Ignacio to stay back, but Rosa couldn't wait. She needed to see Sofía. She needed to know that her granddaughter was inside, alive. The team moved in a coordinated manner, surrounding the worn wooden house in the middle of the property. The gate was ajar, and the lights in the house were off, as if no one were there. But Rosa knew it was a trap. Her heart told her that Sofía was inside. Suddenly, a noise came from inside the house, a muffled scream. Rosa's blood turned to ice. "It's her!" she exclaimed, trying to run toward the door, but Ignacio grabbed her arm firmly. "Wait, Rosa, they might be waiting for that." The police advanced quickly, and in seconds the door was forcibly breached with a loud crash. Time seemed to slow as Rosa watched the officers entering the house, orders echoing in the air. She held her breath, waiting, praying, begging that they would find her granddaughter. Then, what felt like an eternity later, a voice echoed from inside the house. "The girl is here." Relief overwhelmed Rosa before her feet moved on their own. Toward the door, Rosa ran into the house, ignoring the officers who tried to restrain her haste. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Her eyes scanned the room until, in the corner of a small, dimly lit room, she saw Sofía huddled, her eyes wide with fear. The girl was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, but when she saw her grandmother, her expression changed instantly. "Grandma!" she cried, her voice weak but full of desperation. Rosa felt her legs nearly give out, but she gathered her strength to cross the room and pull her granddaughter into a tight embrace. She felt Sofía's little body trembling against hers and held the girl tightly, as if she could protect her from all the world's evil at that moment. "I'm here, my love, I'm here," she whispered, as warm tears streamed down her face. Soon after, Ignacio entered, quickly assessing the scene. The officers had already secured the house, and Leandro was being handcuffed near the door, his face expressionless. as if he didn't care what would happen next. "Where is Ricardo?" an officer asked, but Leandro only laughed, a low, mocking sound. "Do you really think he'd be here? He never gets his hands dirty." Rosa looked at the man with pure disdain, but her attention immediately returned to Sofía. "Did they hurt you, my dear?" she asked, holding the girl's face in her trembling hands. Sofía shook her head slowly, still frightened but otherwise unharmed. "He only said that I was going to live somewhere else, that I wouldn't see you again," she murmured softly. The pain those words caused Rosa was like a punch to her chest. But now Sofía was here, in her arms, and she would never let anyone try to take her away again. Outside the house, as the officers finished searching the premises, Rosa clung to Sofía, not letting go for a second. The girl still trembled, her eyes lost, trying to understand what had happened. Ignacio stayed close, observing every movement of the team. The officer approached with a serious expression. "Leandro is in custody now, but Ricardo is still at large," he said. Rosa felt a shiver run down her spine. "And Claudia?" she asked, her voice laced with distrust. The officer sighed. "We still don't know where she is, but if she's an accomplice to Ricardo, sooner or later we'll find her." Rosa hugged Sofía tightly. The terror of nearly losing her granddaughter had been real, but the threat had not completely disappeared. She needed to ensure that this story ended once and for all. While they were escorted back home, Rosa felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. Sofía was safe, but the trial was still ahead. During the journey, Ignacio received an urgent call. He answered quickly, and his expression hardened. "They just found Ricardo," he said, looking at Rosa. "He was trying to flee the country with forged documents. The police intercepted him at the airport." Rosa felt the air return to her lungs. After everything, finally he would be held, accountable for his crimes. When they arrived home, Rosa locked the door and sat on the sofa, holding Sofía's hands. "It's over now, my love," she whispered, trying to convince both herself and her granddaughter. But deep down, she knew there was one last battle to be fought: the courtroom. The day of the trial arrived faster than Rosa had expected. The courtroom was packed with journalists and curious onlookers, closely following the developments of a case that had already gained national attention. Ignacio had prepared every detail of the defense, armed with irrefutable evidence of Ricardo's crimes, including bribes, threats, and the attempted kidnapping of Sofía. On the other side, Ricardo appeared publicly for the first time since his arrest. Even in handcuffs, he maintained an arrogant posture, as if he still believed he would somehow emerge unpunished. Claudia, however, was not present. Her whereabouts remained unknown, but to Rosa, that no longer mattered. What truly mattered was ensuring that her granddaughter stayed by her side forever. During the hearing, witnesses were called to testify. Miriam, the former nanny, gave a powerful testimony describing the emotional abuses Sofía suffered in the uncle's house. Then, Ignacio presented the documents provided by Claudia, proving the illicit payments and the manipulation of the judicial system. The most impactful moment, however, came when Rosa was called to the witness stand. With a firm voice, yet laden with emotion, she described the pain of losing her son, the responsibility of raising her granddaughter, and the terror she experienced watching Sofía being used as a bargaining chip. "Money can buy many things," Rosa said, looking directly at Ricardo. "But it can't buy love. And that is something my granddaughter will always have by my side." The room fell silent for a few seconds until the judge slowly nodded. In that moment, Rosa felt that she had managed to touch the truth within that court. Ricardo's defense tried to argue that everything was merely a misinterpretation of the facts, and that he and Claudia only wanted what was best for Sofía. However, faced with the overwhelming evidence and the witnesses' testimonies, their strategy quickly collapsed. Ricardo's lawyer perspired as he tried to minimize the damage, but each new document presented by Ignacio only reinforced what was already clear. Ricardo and Claudia had never truly been interested in Sofia's well-being. They wanted the girl for convenience, as a piece to complete the perfect family image they wished to project. Rosa felt a mixture of anger and relief when she saw that, for the first time, Ricardo no longer had control over the situation. He was cornered. When the moment of sentencing arrived, the entire courtroom held its breath. The judge silently reviewed the documents before looking up at the room. In light of the evidence presented, she began in a serious and firm tone. The court rules that the custody of Sofía shall remain with her grandmother, Rosa Alves, who has proven to be the most capable of providing her with a safe and loving home. The words barely had been spoken when Rosa already felt tears streaming down her face. Sofía would stay with her forever. But the judge did not stop there. Furthermore, she continued, Mr. Ricardo Moreira will be indicted for the crimes of bribery, attempted kidnapping and threats, and will be taken into custody pending criminal proceedings. Ricardo remained motionless for a few seconds, as if he couldn't believe he had lost. But it was a fact. He was finished. Ignacio let out a heavy sigh, looking at Rosa with a discreet smile. They had won, finally. Rosa felt her legs weaken and had to hold onto Ignacio's arm to avoid falling. The weight she had carried in her chest for so long began to dissipate, giving way to an intense relief that seemed unreal. Sofía ran to her and hugged her tightly, her little face buried in Rosa's shoulder. "I knew you'd win, Grandma," the girl murmured, her voice trembling but full of affection. Rosa held her granddaughter even tighter, closing her eyes for a moment to absorb that instant. It didn't matter what had happened before, nor the challenges that were yet to come. They were together, and that was all that mattered. On the other side of the room, Ricardo was led away by two police officers, his face expressionless, but his eyes filled with hatred. He quickly glanced at Rosa before being taken away, and in that look there was the certainty that his defeat was final. Claudia, for her part, remained at large, and the police had already begun searching for her whereabouts. But Rosa no longer wanted to think about her. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to shut off from the war she had fought and focus solely on the present. When they left the courtroom, the sun shone brightly in the sky, as if the world itself were telling her it was time to start over. Rosa took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on her face and holding Sofia's hand firmly. "Let's go home, my love," she said, with a tired but genuine smile. For the first time in a long time, those words sounded secure. The following days were a mixture of rest and adjustment. After months of living under tension and fear, Rosa still took time to get used to the peace. Small gestures, like seeing Sofía playing in the backyard or hearing her laughter echoing through the house, now seemed like precious moments she would never take for granted again. Mrs. Helena began visiting more frequently, always bringing a cake or some sweets, as if determined to ensure that that home would never again be gloomy. Ignacio, on the other hand, continued to follow Ricardo's case closely, ensuring that he had no chance to escape justice. But for Rosa, the most important thing had already happened. Sofía was safe, and no one could ever take her from her again. One quiet morning, while Rosa was preparing coffee, she heard her granddaughter calling her excitedly from the backyard. Stepping outside, she found Sofía holding a small vase of flowers that Mrs. Helena had given her. "Grandma, can we plant these here so they grow and stay beautiful forever?" Sofía exclaimed. Rosa smiled, feeling a comforting warmth in her chest. That simple request carried a profound meaning. After so long fighting to prevent everything from being taken away, she could finally think about the future, about something that would bloom and endure. "Of course, my love, we'll plant them together." And as they dug a small space in the earth to plant the flowers, Rosa realized that this moment symbolized more than a simple act. It was the beginning of a new life, where fear would be left behind and love would continue to grow firm and unshakable. Over the following weeks, Rosa and Sofía's routine finally began to return to normal. The girl resumed classes at school, no longer needing to look over her shoulder or fear that someone might try to take her away again. The nights became peaceful once more, and Rosa noticed that even her nightmares had diminished. Still, from time to time, she would wake up startled, gripped by an irrational fear that it had all been only a brief respite before another storm. But then she would look at Sofía, sleeping serenely by her side, and remember that now they were safe. They had won, and nothing would ever tear them apart again. Ignacio continued to follow the unfolding case. Against Ricardo, who now faced formal charges of corruption, bribery, and attempted kidnapping. Claudia, on the other hand, was still on the run, but the police had intensified the search, and sooner or later she would be found. However, Rosa refused to live with that shadow over her mind. She had learned through all this experience that fear could not govern her life. That day, while enjoying a coffee on the porch, watching Sofía running barefoot in the yard, she felt for the first time in a long while that her life was complete. She had no money, no influence, but she had what mattered most: love, courage, and the certainty that no matter what happened, she would always find a way to protect her granddaughter. And that was all she needed. One afternoon, while Rosa was sewing a new curtain for the living room, she heard gentle knocks on the door. When she opened it, she found Ignacio standing there, holding a folder of documents and wearing a discreet smile on his face. "Good news?" she asked, already anticipating that when it came to this case, nothing was ever simple. Ignacio entered, sat at the table, and opened the folder. "Ricardo is now formally indicted and will remain in custody until his trial," he explained. "And regarding Claudia, well, Interpol has already been notified. She won't be on the run for long." Rosa sighed, feeling the weight of those words. Although she wished to forget that these people had ever crossed her path, knowing that justice was being served brought an indescribable relief. "So that's it?" she asked, trying to absorb everything. Ignacio smiled. "Almost. The final sentence is still pending, but the hardest part is over." Rosa served coffee for the two of them, sitting across from Ignacio. For a moment, neither spoke, simply enjoying the quiet silence of the house. "You never gave up on us, Ignacio," she finally said, breaking the silence. "I don't know what we would have done without you." The lawyer shrugged modestly, smiling sincerely. "You taught me what it truly means to fight for something. I only did my part." Rosa laughed softly, shaking her head. She knew he was being modest, but also understood that without him, perhaps this story would have ended very differently. As she took a sip of the hot coffee, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time in months, she could say with conviction, everything was going to be all right. Months passed, and gradually, the legal battle became only a distant memory. Life resumed its course, and Rosa began to feel the weight of tension lift from her shoulders. Sofía returned to being the cheerful, spontaneous child she always was, playing in the yard, inventing stories, and filling the house with her contagious laughter. Yet sometimes, Rosa still felt a tightness in her chest, remembering what they had been through. The threat of losing her granddaughter, the constant fear, the sleepless nights. All of it left scars that, although invisible, were still there. However, she knew that every wound was a reminder of the strength it took to fight. And now, finally, she could enjoy the present without fear. On one sunny morning, Rosa and Sofía went to the neighborhood park, a simple outing that once seemed impossible without the constant feeling of being watched. As Sofía chased after a dog playing on the grass, Rosa sat on a bench and observed the activity around her. For the first time, she realized she was no longer on high, alert that she no longer needed to look over her shoulder. She took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs, and smiled. She didn't know what the future held, but she was certain of one thing: she would never again let fear steal her peace. In the distance, Sofía waved excitedly, calling her to come and play. Rosa stood, adjusted her glasses, and walked over to her granddaughter. Yes, life was finally where it should be. That night, While preparing dinner, Rosa realized how much things had changed. The house, once heavy with tension and fear, now overflowed with tranquility. Sofía, seated at the table, was absent-mindedly drawing and humming a tune she had learned at school. Rosa watched her granddaughter for a moment, her heart filling with gratitude. They had been through so much, faced so many challenges, but here they were, together and safe. Ignacio still made regular visits, ensuring that everything was in order with the case. But now the meetings were no longer, filled with urgency and danger. For the first time, they talked about the future, about Sofía's school, about the plans Rosa could make without the shadow of uncertainty hanging over them. One night, before going to sleep, Sofía snuggled up beside her grandmother and asked softly, "Grandma, can we really be happy now?" Rosa felt a lump in her throat, but smiled, running her fingers through the girl's soft hair. "My love, we always were happy. We just needed to remember that." Sofía smiled and closed her eyes, falling asleep quickly, as if she could finally rest without fear. Rosa stayed there for a while, listening to her granddaughter's peaceful breathing. The fight had been hard, and the scars would never completely vanish. But now, love and safety had triumphed, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, as the sun entered through the kitchen window, Rosa prepared coffee as she did every day, but with a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. When Sofía appeared, still sleepy, she sat at the table and asked, "What are we going to do today, Grandma?" Rosa smiled and served a piece of cake to her granddaughter. "Anything we want, my love." And in that moment, she realized that the true meaning of freedom wasn't the absence of fear, but the certainty that no matter what happens, there will always be a new beginning. If you enjoyed this emotional story, don't forget to leave your like on the video and subscribe to the channel to follow more incredible stories like this one. Also, activate the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Thank you for watching and see you next time.